We're having a lot of debates at Sangam, especially around how the mobility ecosystem is going to evolve. And I'm really happy that we have a brain trust here, which could potentially give us some ideas on how things might evolve. So I'm Karthik Chandrasekar. I run Sangam Ventures. I have a really amazing panel here with me. I'm going to briefly introduce all of you and then maybe have you talk about the organizations that you represent. I'm going to start with Eshrat. Eshrat is a principal at SOLshare, a peer-to-peer energy trading company where we did a early friendly investment from Sangam Ventures. She also used to work with BRAC, where it was more about deploying technologies to empower field staff. Eshrat, do you want to introduce what SOLshare is doing on the mobility side?
Sure. I wasn't sure that I would be the first person going off. So SOLshare, I don't know how many of you know of it, or I'm sure you've heard a lot about SOLshare in this past 2 days. We are a sustainable energy infrastructure company, but our core focus is actually on our trading algorithm, which ensures that customers' energy needs are being met, but at the same time creates these financial incentives for them to actually engage as prosumers on our network, on a microgrid, by using their rooftop panels and in-home storage. And for us, I mean, this actually made sense to operate out of Bangladesh because Bangladesh has 3 assets, right? It has one of the largest solar home system deployments in the world, 6 million of them, which means we already have a supply base to work with. There's a phenomenal penetration of mobile money, which means that all financial transactions become seamless, even in the most remotest part of the country. And finally, it is one of the most densely populated places in the world, which means we can just operate wherever. But for us recently, we've actually started experimenting with introducing these charging infrastructure within our peer-to-peer solar microgrids. And what we're doing now is actually trying to expand that scope to look at what are the other options that are available to make it more systematic, more efficient and sustainable. Because right now in Bangladesh, there are 1.5 million electric rickshaws driving around all over the country. So this is a massive market opportunity for us here.
Next up is Dr. Jennifer Dungs. She's the global head of mobility for InnoEnergy. And Jennifer spent quite a bit of time on both sides of the Atlantic, working with the automobile industry and with the Fraunhofer Institute as well, and with a joint lab with MIT. Jennifer, could you tell us a bit about the work that you're doing at InnoEnergy?
Yeah, sure. So hello to everyone out there. I'm happy to be here today and part of the discussion. So as Karthik introduced me already, I've spent over 20 years working in the auto industry at Ford and BMW and Porsche, and now I'm on the other side at InnoEnergy. We're a strategic investor in topics related to sustainable energy, and we've invested over 600 million in the last 8 years. We have different portfolios, so focusing on renewable energy or storage, and I'm responsible for all the investments that we do globally in mobility. And yeah, so I'm really happy. One of my main topics is really looking at the impact that we can have on cities with respect to these new innovations, simply because of the kind of impact that would translate into for CO2 and energy demand reduction.
Thank you, Jennifer. And next up is Dr. Rainer, who's been the visionary behind batteries. They're basically developing multi-purpose power systems. I just looked at their website. It looks really cool. And that's based on upcycling electric vehicle batteries. Sorry, I kind of took away your thunder because I wanted you to introduce, but it was just too cool to pass on. But you're also an impact angel investor. Could you tell us a bit about what's happening with batteries?
Yeah, thanks. And hello, everybody. Yeah, Rainer Hoenig, my name. I'm the founder of Betteries. So what's batteries all about? Basically, we all love that e-mobility will take off and is taking off in developing countries right now, but it generates the next problem in a couple of years. We will be swamped by used batteries coming out of e-mobility. And on the other hand, we all know developing countries are in energy poverty situations. So in mission from batteries is to help both problems. We want to give these batteries from the e-mobility a second life, upcycle them to give them another 3 to 10 years productive usage. And on the other hand, generate an affordable battery storage system, affordable and capable battery storage system for fighting energy poverty. And as such, as you said, we developed a mobile multipurpose and modular battery system, which also can be used for short range e-mobility in a swapping situation for three-wheelers, for instance. So that's what batteries is all about.
Thank you so much. Next up is Jim Choo, who also has sat on both sides of the table. He's a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. He's been a social entrepreneur. His startup, Glow Haiti, basically provides safe water for over 150,000 Haitians. And he's also an investor with Untapped, covering Sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean. Could you tell us a bit more about Untapped, Jim?
Yes, absolutely. So Untapped, our focus is on bridging the financing gap by providing CapEx financing for fast-growing businesses. So our recognition is that one of the biggest unmet needs in the market, especially in frontier markets, Africa, Southeast Asia, South Asia, is CapEx financing. And so unlike the standard instruments we know from venture capital, we structure our instrument differently so that both for investors and for entrepreneurs, the model is more appropriate for fast growth. So some people like to think about it as venture debt, but we really think about it as financing that provides better liquidity for investors, but also provides the scale-up capital necessary for entrepreneurs to grow. And I think from an e-mobility perspective, so we have a product or instrument called Smart Asset Financing, which is asset financing, but using remote monitoring, remote control, and remote payments as a form of monetizing that asset finance. And so e-vehicles is an exceptional way, or fits that model very, very well, in the sense that it helps reduce the upfront cost of acquiring, whether it's e-vehicles or even e-vehicle charging infrastructure, so that we could actually roll out what we all are here to do more rapidly. So we're based in San Francisco. We have a pretty strong presence in Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. But on a personal level, I've invested in a few different e-vehicle companies. And I'm also a small investor in SOLshare as well, just to give SOLshare some additional plugs.
And last but not the least, we have Varun Goenka, who's the current CEO at Charger. And they are on a mission to basically transform two-wheeler and three-wheeler charging infrastructure through a battery swapping network. Varun, can you give us a latest update on what's happening with Charger?
Hi, Karthik. Thanks for the introduction, and hello, guys. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Charger. Charger, we started 2 years back, where in India there are more than 2 million e-rickshaws already on road, and all struggling with the conventional battery technology. So we started Charger with a vision to make it the largest distribution network for electric two-wheelers and three-wheelers by solving 2 problems. One, converting the capex to opex on the battery side. Secondly is spreading the widest distribution network so that there is no range anxiety in this. So we always said, buy the vehicle, don't buy the fuel, just pay per use. So we have now, in Delhi itself, there are 600,000 e-rickshaws currently. And we have around 10 battery swapping stations. We are opening swapping stations every week in Delhi right now, and catering to this population. The most interesting part in this is, impacting the life of this e-rickshaw drivers. We have, because of this service, they have been able to enhance their daily revenue almost more than twice. Double the revenue they're earning. There is no capital investment. So what we saw, this ecosystem was struggling because of two major issues. One of the major issues was financing of the vehicles, and financing of vehicles was struggling because of the laid back battery technology, where there was a regular investment and a limited kilometers. So with our service of battery swapping stations, we are not solving it only for the e-rickshaw drivers, but also for the OEMs and the financiers who are looking to finance these vehicles.
Starting with you, maybe give a picture of what a day for this e-rickshaw puller looks like.
Okay, so Karthik, primarily these e-rickshaw pullers are the guys who were doing those odd jobs as a daily wage earners in factories or a labor work. So they shifted to e-rickshaw business because so for them it was an initial investment of 40,000-50,000 rupees, where they buy these e-rickshaws through high cost of financing, and they make their daily revenue through this, and they pay the charging cost, they pay the EMIs per month. So typically these are the guys who have migrated from other cities, especially in Delhi. The people who have come from extreme eastern part of India, western part of India, to earn their living. So that's a basic profile of these e-rickshaw drivers.
Is it any different in Bangladesh?
Yes, there are actually quite some differences, and it's quite interesting actually. So there's actually quite a few different types of profile of rickshawalas here. So you have those who are, I mean, again, if you're getting into the EV business, as an EV driver, that is a very, very aspirational career. We have districts where we see a lot of migration to the Middle East. And over there, we see a lot of youth engaged in the EV space as drivers, because for them, this is a much easier way of earning income than working as an agricultural worker. And for them, they view it more as a gig while they're waiting for their, the visas come through to go abroad. On the other part of the country in Chittagong, which is a port city for us, what we're hearing from a lot of these rickshawalas is that they don't want to work as day laborers. There is definitely a socioeconomic upward mobility aspect to becoming an EV driver versus just your regular rickshaw driver on, pedaling away. And for them, they see this as their best work opportunity. And interesting enough, in Bangladesh, there aren't any financing provided for this segment. And when we've been looking into the space more and more, those who own rickshaws, it makes electric rickshaws, let me be very specific over here, it is actually a plain vanilla business for them. I mean, the unit economics work out in their favor. They have a payback period of less than, a little bit over 1 year. But because this is coming at in a way where they are now, because you're comparing it with the pedal rickshaws, right? So for them, this means they're completing more rides. They're able to get a much higher income. And so it's a little bit different over here, because since no government financing or even microfinance organizations targeting specifically towards rickshawalas have ever been provided. And we've seen it over the past 5 years, this 1.5 million rickshaws, this is indigenous tech that they're using. Yes, it is lead acid battery. Bangladesh is predominantly using lead acid batteries over here, but no financing. And what we're seeing in terms of growth, this is a segment that, some back of the envelope calculation, so it's growing at 9% per year. So they play a big role for both first and last mile transportation here.
And in our case at Sangam, we are also an investor in a company called Cell Propulsion, which is looking at the electric light commercial vehicles as well as heavy electric vehicles when it comes to e-commerce, logistics, delivery, all of that as well. And that seems to be also a booming market, but I'm assuming that's also something similar that you would see in the West or in other parts of the world. So maybe Jim, Raina, Jennifer, do you have anything to add? Maybe I'll start with Jennifer.
Well, actually, yeah. So what we're seeing here is there's the movement in the first step from going from these last mile delivery trucks, which are predominantly diesel or combustion engines, to electric. But it's now at the same time that the discussion is moving towards just moving to electric doesn't actually solve most of our problems, which is the congestion and parking tickets and lots of other topics, where these sort of purpose-built vehicles can actually serve a role. But with those purpose-built vehicles, what we see is there's not one size fits all. Because you have all the different segments of what we call last mile delivery, everything from I'm going to order a pizza and get it in 15 minutes to I'm going to order all of my groceries from the grocery store, or delivery of beer to the local restaurants and things like that. That's heavy, really, really heavy. And so what we're seeing is, and especially related to the battery technology, is predominantly this shift towards the removable exchangeable batteries, which just provide like a different way to what you say, own the vehicle and use the service, but also for managing the operations a little bit more flexibly. But with that, again, it's not one size fits all. There will not, in the near term, in my opinion, be a removable exchangeable battery that you can use for a vehicle that's going to carry 350 kilograms, which is what you need actually for, let's call it the rickshaw, because they're kind of the same design for the Heinekens and all the heavy goods that need to be transported. And then with the pizza delivery, you can serve that with just one removable exchangeable battery. And for these other vehicles, you may need 8. So, but you're also seeing that kind of trend here.
I think Raina wants to add into that.
No, Jennifer, we certainly need to talk at some point. We have a 3-wheeler here, and we pull it with 2 batteries, and it has a cargo load of 350 kilograms, and we do this on a daily basis. So it can be solved. Yeah. But I'd like to add to this, and I want to give it two dimensions. In the Western world, as I said, I'm also a little bit an impact investor. I actually invested in a bike trailer which is electrically powered for last mile delivery, which is used by UPS and in future by IKEA and others. So I completely agree with you. There is no such thing like one size fits it all. I mean, it really depends on the task. It depends on the size and the circumstances of the last mile delivery. And there's a huge play field at the moment where many solutions, smaller and bigger ones, are tested. And I would say in 3 years from now, we might know what will survive and what will be actually a winner and what will be less successful. From a batteries perspective, I can say, I mean, our focus is Africa at the moment, and this is very early days in Africa. I mean, you see, again, first attempts in particular in Eastern Africa to play with e-mobility. We actually will have a pilot in Tanzania later this year, if Corona allows us to do this. And again, let me say in 2 years, 3 years from now, this will become a movement. I would say they are maybe 4 or 5 years behind India in that respect, but they clearly see the benefits and they see the need. So early days, but huge potential, I would say.
So I'd love to join you and Rainer, you and Jennifer in the discussion about the 3-wheelers. So the business I run in Haiti, we do water distribution. So each load that goes out, and we use a 3-wheeled trailer currently to do that, gas powered, obviously. And our limit there is about, interestingly enough, about 250 kilograms. So if I had a cost-effective solution, I think one of the issues here is about cost and total life of ownership. If we can get that cost down to something that is very competitive with ICE three-wheel trailers, I think it could be a real revolution. The second point is, I can speak to this from the African context. So I agree with you. It's early days in Africa, but it will be. I think in my mind, it's a matter of when, not if. So is it 2 or 3 years? We don't know. Is it 5 years? Is it next year? We don't know. But where we're targeting is really around smaller vehicles, so electric motorcycles, and enabling the electrification of that route, because as all of you know, and similar to places in South Asia as well, motorcycle taxis is the go-to mode of transport for most people. And so electrifying that and reducing the daily cost ultimately for a motorcycle taxi driver and creating more ownership among those drivers is going to be a potential major driver of growth for electric mobility in Africa.
Yeah, that's one thing that we ended up importing from India, from South Asia, actually. Jennifer, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just had a question, like in this whole scope, and also what you guys are seeing in some of the other markets with respect to ownership. You know, we talked a little bit about maybe the role of energy as a service, you know, and how the battery will be seen, but especially for some of you that are in the different markets, with the rickshaw drivers, you know, do you see ownership as being the primary? Because it also starts to affect what kind of business models will be most successful and how you manage the CapEx or whatever with the startups and initially, how you're going to handle that, you know?
Yeah, so I can just speak.
Ownership at multiple levels, right? So yeah. Jim, sorry, and I think Raina had his hands up as well. So Jim, go ahead.
No, so this is it's a great question because it's a critical part of getting the model right. And again, there's no one size fits all here, but especially in Africa, ownership is extremely important. And so, whereas in the US, you can get away with models where you rent by the day, where you rent by the hour, by the kilometer. In Africa, there needs to be a route to ownership model, because that changes the mentality of the drivers significantly. It isn't just gig work for most African drivers. This is their long-term career. And so the ownership of that vehicle is really critical. So, you know, there are instances where a peer operating lease, or, you know, peer pay by the day, pay by the hour, etc., could work. But for the most part, ownership is, you know, a leasing model that goes to ownership is the right way to go.
Did you have a question or a comment? Otherwise, I'm going to open up to Eshrat and Varun to talk about both, you know, ownership from a business model perspective for the drivers, for the battery or the vehicle, and then the charging or swapping infrastructure, right? I think all of them are up for who owns and who basically manages them, which can be very different.
Yeah, Karthik. So here in India, you know, the ownership of the vehicle is really important for the drivers when we talk of the ownership part. If you see that current, you know, 2 million plus drivers, 71% are the driver-owned vehicles. Okay, so you know, they own that pride, and there's a social stigma around it that at that segment, you know, it's not a IT millennial crowd who would like to go on a Zoom car, but ownership is important. But as far as when we go to the battery, and as we said, you know, battery is one thing which comes with a lot of, I would say, liabilities, where you have to maintain it, you have to manage it, you know, and there's again, high cost involved to it. More importantly, if that is not owning the battery and giving them the freedom to move in more directions, do more kilometers, do more business. So that makes total sense for them. So that's my view on the ownership part as the Indian market is concerned. Be it three-wheelers or we talk about the two-wheelers. In two-wheelers, if you see the delivery, as Karthik pointed out, the last mile delivery thing, even that category is not owned by the e-com giants. These are all the driver-owned vehicle who actually work for any logistic operator or for the e-com companies they registered on the platform to give them the service. So having a distributed network where they know they can move in any direction and it's like a no-brainer for them is help actually change the mindset from that ownership to the leasing part for them.
And how about your charging stations or your swapping stations? Are they owned by you? Do you have partners who own them? How does that work?
So Karthik, firstly, so we are purely into the swapping stations. The swapping stations, we have a franchisee model, which are owned by the partners. These partners are specific profile of, I would say supply side of people who are actually locally embedded in those areas in the city. Because if you see an e-rickshaw is not allowed on a highway and there are a lot of restrictions in certain areas for their movement. So they won't be going altogether to a 5-kilometer radius to a petrol pump or any swapping station. They want it within their routes. So we do it through a franchisee model.
Anything to add on the business model that seems to be prevalent in Bangladesh, especially around your side, the charging, the infrastructure?
Yeah. So in Bangladesh, I mean, the experience between those who rent rickshaws versus those who own the economics are very, very different. And the reason for that is actually the cost of electricity, what you have to pay. And I'm not talking about whether it's a legal connection or illegal connection. It literally boils down to how much information asymmetry that exists. So if you own your own rickshaw, you can control when you charge it, how much you charge it. You have more control over that and you can control your cost. If you are renting, you are dependent on the garage owner. So you cannot go and charge it at another charging station. You have to go to your garage owner's spot. And what we found is the amount of electricity that's required to charge that battery versus what they're charging, it's a massive, massive discrimination. Like it's a huge gap. So when you're on that kind of a system, it's not lucrative. It's relatively lucrative, but again, you don't have much power. And what that also means is that you are also limited by the kind of routes you can take. So if you own your own rickshaw, you can charge your battery whenever you want to or need to, and you can even do evening rides, which in many cases when we're talking to rickshaw drivers who own rental rickshaw, they said that they don't want to take the evening rides, which are more lucrative because they don't know if the battery will last them, whether they can come back, and whether they even have the kind of permission to go beyond that perimeter or the periphery. So that's how the economics here works out between the kind of
providing financing.
Sorry.
Is there anybody providing financing today in Bangladesh for these vehicles?
So this is all, I mean, right now the kind of, so we don't have like rickshaw financing anywhere in the bank, in the formal sector. But what we've seen is definitely, because the microfinance organizations are getting in the space, but they do have it in a limited amount. So you get it, but then you have to have a significant, you need to have a certain amount of savings because this goes beyond the usual range that they would normally give out to like maybe people who are coming from ultra poor backgrounds. This one kind of falls into the working capital category. So there is a requirement to have collateral of certain cases, or you need to be able to show certain savings. So obviously, like I said, if you're able to become an EV driver, then you have that chance to become more economically mobile and move up the kind of ladder. But there's also a bias in who gets to be able to access that opportunity. So there is a distinction between the profile of those who are renting rickshaws and those who are able to own a rickshaw.
Can I just jump in here? I want to make a quick comment on some of the things that you said and ask Varun a question. I think the reason we created our model for financing is some of the things that you had alluded to, Eshrat, about the limitations of MFIs. A lot of people think, oh yeah, of course, MFIs will solve the problem for the financing gap. Simply not true. Because of the way the MFI model works, it's very difficult for most MFIs to go beyond a certain dollar amount in terms of the lending. Or if they do, they revert to what I would call conventional models for lending, which basically exclude many of the people that we're talking about. And so if we want an effective model for leasing e-rickshaws, for example, you really need a different model. And so the approach that we've taken is to say, okay, well, this conventional lending of looking at balance sheets, looking at collateral and so on, having a credit officer check on you every month, that model does not scale well in that part of the market. And so we instead, and this is where electric mobility I think is great, we look at more of the IoT and the smart connection of that asset. And so, okay, look, if we're taking the revenue stream from that vehicle or that asset, then that is a security for the loan, not the individual's ability to pay from other sources. So as long as the asset is in operation and is generating revenue because you're collecting that revenue via digital means, you actually have a future revenue stream on which to lend against. And so I think electric mobility has a very interesting potential in this regard because of its ability to build in software. So remote monitoring, of course, but also remote control, kill switches, etc., as well as connecting that to a digital payments infrastructure that allows you to collect the revenues directly from those vehicles.
I need to jump in here.
In your network? Yeah, Raina, go ahead.
No,
And
I mean,
I think I want to open it up to batteries and charging infrastructure as well, right? I think technology can play a big part.
And just before Raina goes, because it goes with it, and that model of asset financing is especially suited for charging infrastructure.
Yeah. No, to be honest, I just want to really confirm and say Jim speaks out of my heart, because that's exactly what we also share as a view. And this is why we developed a battery, which is not just a battery, but an IoT device. So it is a connected device. And we also build a platform in the background to hang on payment systems and mobile money and all this tracking and so on. So it's exactly the way we see it. And I want to push this even further. We just submitted a grant proposal which tokenizes the asset. So in other words, you link the financing of the asset to the IoT device. And then, as you say, as there's total transparency about revenue generation, because you see this thing in operation, you can share even micro revenues across the participants in the value chain, right? From the guy who charges with renewable energy to the guy who drives, to the guy who lends the battery to a driver, etc., etc. I mean, this is future, right? But in the way we build the architecture around the hardware, we actually realized it's about these kind of things to enable A, the financing, and B, affordable business model for the user.
So we need to talk, because we've built a platform specifically to do what you just talked about, but for a number of different kinds of assets, not just for batteries and swapping.
Let's do it.
And so we'll do that for a number of different kinds of assets to get to the economies of scale necessary, of course.
Brilliant, Tim. Right.
Yeah, and I want to open it up to everybody in terms of technology and what are the technologies to look out for as we see this space evolve. Anything incremental to add? Because I'm just thinking about tokens and pay-as-you-go IoT solutions. And I know in India, you can have a vehicle which is supposed to carry 2 people, which will have 4. So I'm not sure how you can like ensure that there are proper payments being made. But Jennifer, anything to add?
I mean, I definitely can add to the markets where most of you guys have your expertise, but at least in Europe, what we're seeing here is, and maybe you guys have seen it, I mean, we have like just a struggle, right? So, I mean, when we talk about swappable batteries and the infrastructure for that, I mean, in order to make those business models work, you have to have the utilization, right, for those swaps. And that's actually not an easy task where we don't have the same kind of density and behavior, what you guys described with the rickshaws in India. So we have to build that up. But when you talk about other technologies that are kind of key to this piece, again, it's a different model because we don't have this ownership predominantly yet on like micro mobility in that sector. So we still have this sharing piece that's going on. And what you see with this is then the vehicles are used differently. So the vandalism, the serviceability of the vehicles. So actually we need vehicles that then are built for that kind of market. So of course, using recycled parts and all these kind of things can also help from a sustainability point of view. But in addition, just serviceability, I mean, when these first kickboard scooters were coming out, you'd find that the main a screw that was breaking all the time, you couldn't even access it. So like, you just have to throw the whole scooter out, right? So it's just making sure the vehicles are built for the kind of market that you have. And here, the vehicle lifetimes are not yet where they need to be in order to make the business model work, and this whole operations topic, which includes the swappable battery, but also like the rebalancing and all of this. And I think, at least from my standpoint, it's still a wild card on the sharing versus ownership, how this is going to develop actually, because what we also see is that if people are using it regularly, whatever this vehicle is, a moped, an e-bike, whatever, and they're using it regularly for their commute, then it switches to like an ownership thing, But for me, we're not there yet to know, and that's why I was also interested. But those are some of the pieces that are relevant, I think, right now in Europe, as this is on this up curve of growth.
A lot of it about what you're talking about, Jennifer, which is the utilization, right? The asset utilization, or sweating the asset as much as possible, and to get to that marginal economics versus like fossil fuel based vehicle, right? But also, I think in terms of technology, I'm assuming, Varun, Eshrat, you're seeing a lot of lithium ion now coming into India, right? So most of the 2 and 3 wheelers earlier were basically doing lead acid batteries. And so, looking at just turnaround times for charging and all of that equation also kind of adds a big dimension. So we're kind of talking about like very two different ecosystems.
So Karthik, yeah, interestingly, what you pointed out, and the discussion, 2-3 points I would like to highlight. First, technology of the battery, a very important, which has to be made for the local environment we are talking about. In India, where there is a huge temperature variation is there is high dust factor is there. We can't expect our means the battery has to be charged in a controlled environment, number one. Number two, the product has to be robust enough to, bear the, those, I would say, little rude driving patterns in India and the Indian road conditions. So like currently the battery technology which we are using, it's a patented technology made in India in lithium with NMC cells we are using of LG and Panasonic, where, it's one thing, it's agnostic to the make of e-rickshaw. It can fit in any electric three-wheeler. It doesn't need any air-conditioned room or a controlled environment because of its thermal management within the battery. We have built a very robust BMS system and an IoT device where we measure the health of the battery and the behavior of the driver driving pattern both, which was very well pointed out by Rainer that, and I really like that point of, the IoT and the financing part can be actually linked very well in this scenario. Beyond that, what you just said about the the asset utilization, which even Jennifer said, is a very important part, because all your cost economics will depend on how much asset you have to deploy for one vehicle. Like, if you're putting, let's say, 2 batteries in one vehicle, for the swapping station, we just can't put 2:2, for one vehicle, double the battery set. That will increase the capex and the whole unit economics changes. So that's the operational excellence and, how do you use data to, and, basic, I would say, operational SOPs to manage that. Like we are today managing at, 1:1.3, 1.4, our asset ratio at our stations. So these are different components which need to come together to service this market. So, and lastly, on the payment side, what was discussed previously, in India, interestingly, the e-rickshaw drivers, majority doesn't even own a smartphone. They are on a feature phone. So the online payment mechanism will take a bit of time. It's changing. The habit is changing and becoming more accessible and affordable for them. But yes, as they convert into smartphones, so monitoring their behavior, giving them more access to a better routes, payment mechanism, a lot of things can be built up over that ecosystem. But initially, it's like the chicken and egg thing in everyone EV. But in India, we already have 2.4 million e-rickshaws. So, it's already existing. We just have to create this network.
Can I just,
yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
It just made me, I wanted to kind of like link what you just said back to what Jim and Rainer were commenting earlier on the importance of this IoT piece, because the one thing I would kind of have a question for you guys also then on as a group is, when you talk about the IoT and how important it's going to be, and also for getting the finance and the revenue streams and whatever, if the batteries are as a service, or energy as a service, then it kind of changes where you put all your IoT. Then maybe you put all your IoT on the vehicle because it's owned and it's like the different model, or do you put it on the battery because, or how do you make that differentiation for those revenue streams based on who owns what piece? And I think it's a really interesting topic that I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Sure. Sorry.
And even if you don't have a smartphone, you could practically just have a QR code on your vehicle and be able to enable payments, right? So you don't even need a smartphone, so they can just pay the vehicle directly with no tech.
Yep.
But coming back,
so,
how do you think
just
about your battery life? I just want to have a quick conversation. I want to go back to Rainer as well and think about, what's the battery life that you assume? Obviously, these are early days, right?
So reminding us that we are a second life, of course, we have to deal with less battery life than a fresh new first life battery. But we think we can achieve between 1,500 and 2,000 cycles. But this makes it even more important that we as a company feel we can manage the asset better than the operator. And this is why IoT is even more important, because you can do a lot to help the remaining life by the right treatment, by the right charging cycle, et cetera, et cetera. So the bet here is really that we understand our asset better and therefore can manage it better to squeeze the last out of it. And we should not place this burden on our customers or the operators of this asset, because it's a complex beast. It is difficult, and why should he take this investment risk on this? So this is why we think we enable this, and I see Varun is nodding, that this should be strong arguments for a battery as a service model in the ultimate game.
Where do you think is the market for second life batteries, right? So are you getting a flood of batteries and they're just giving it to you for free because you're taking care, and then you kind of tell them you're going to take care of the disposal in the future? Or do you have to pay for these batteries? Is this part of the original battery manufacturers like financing solution? Because there seems to be a lot of questions around, like, the first life battery still, right?
Okay, so the short answer is, I mean, I could talk for long about this, but it's still a Wild West market because it's very new. So it takes a bit of time to establish a fair market value and a fair market price. But there comes a couple of things you can say with certainty. First of all, in 2025, we will have annually 250 gigawatt hours of used batteries coming on the market. That is more than enough to power a city like Berlin for a couple of days just on battery power. Okay, number one. Number two, recycling today is a loss-making process. So someone in the value chain has to pay for this. So the motivation, of course, is that this responsibility for recycling moves from the original equipment manufacturer to whoever uses it. So in our case, we take on responsibility for recycling as we speak, because we believe that when this becomes a material issue for us, there are much more effective and cost-effective recycling solutions. Number two. And number three, the price of a second life battery has to follow from a cap the first life pricing development, because you can scale it by state of health, for instance. That means there's a cap, and we benefit from the further price drop in first life until the price is zero, basically, which we think is around 2030. I mean, no one knows crystal ball, but there is room for many years to do this. And of course, this price also must involve that I have a repurposing effort and repurposing cost. So I cannot pay the 70% of a new battery price for this, because I still have to dismantle it, proof it, and repackage it. And that is kind of the cap and ceiling of price I can offer to the market. And last thing I can say is it took me years to get the ear of the automotive industry. Luckily, we now have it. And soon you will see we will announce a partnership with a global OEM on this. So we have security of supply. Jim, did you want to jump in?
Did I want to jump in? I mean, look, I think in terms of ownership, I think with the batteries is very much in line with what Rainer said. It's the opposite of what I mentioned earlier about ownership of the vehicles themselves. I think when you have a technically complicated asset such as batteries, and no one, and I think there is a misperception that these batteries or batteries in general are not complicated technologies. They're very complicated technologies, and providing it as a service, not just financially, but also technically and operationally, makes absolute sense. So, but there was also a previous question about, where does the IoT go? Quite frankly, IoT technology is so cheap these days, you can go on anything. So you can have it on the bike and on the batteries. There's nothing preventing you from doing that. But I think the important point here is that you should and have to create a service out of the charging infrastructure. Whether that's battery swapping or fast charging or whatever it is, it has to be a service. No one wants to own that. Sure, in the US, you might have some people with their own charging stations, but that's an exception. That's not going to happen in frontier markets. And so I see a really strong business model for battery swapping, or just generally charging infrastructure as a service, whatever method it is, battery swapping with Varun and Rainer or something else. But vehicle ownership as one of the primary, lease to own, if you will, as one of the primary drivers.
In terms of the ecosystem, do you see policy playing a big part? Do you have a expectation around policy evolving or an ask to policymakers to make life easier for you and the portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big discussion right now in Europe, which is how can we get this entire topic kind of on the agenda, because the topic with passenger cars and electric mobility in that sector is somehow clear, but we're missing all the opportunity to really transform mobility with all these different purpose-built vehicles that are kind of just not in scope. It's just not written down. And so we're going to be releasing a fairly interesting publication soon that talks about the impact of this, at least in Europe, when we can design for it. And that's, I think, maybe an important piece of it is that, again, you know, we talked about the different segments of last mile or all the different cities, and you talked, Varun, about the batteries for the environment. And in Europe, it's maybe not so extreme, but you know, you have different temperatures and different use cases and weather and just different behavior in general. And so creating a framework that allows cities to kind of share best practices that are supported by regulation. And right now, I'm so motivated by the topic because we see already the traction. So now many of us are at home. We have this hyper local mobility. So we're just kind of moving around in our own little spaces around our apartments. We have the push in Europe right now for new infrastructure. So new bike lanes, wider bike lanes, all this. So it's a great opportunity. And then we have this boom with e-commerce, which it was already growing at a good rate, but now with COVID, the numbers are significantly higher. And so it's just the right time to make sure we get this transition right. And we're working on those discussions to make sure that the bodies that can open up funding don't forget this whole sector, which actually can be more vehicles or units than passenger cars. So we're really pushing on all the doors at the member states and at the EU level to make sure we do this in the right way.
Thank you, Varun. Eshrat, do you want to talk about policy in India, Bangladesh?
Yep.
Sure. So policy-wise, I think, well, one, we don't really have a policy on EVs here as of right now. So it's an open market for anyone who wants to kind of engage in experimentation. But at the same time, Bangladesh has a proliferation of lead acid batteries, and that's just our history, right? The 6 million solar home systems that were distributed were all lead acid batteries. And from there, actually, a lot of these batteries are being used as EV batteries. Or we have battery manufacturers now producing EV batteries. But unlike the batteries that were used for solar home systems, these have usually a lifetime of 1 year, and the warranties are provided for only 6 months. So the numbers that we're seeing right now is that, you know, we have 1.5 million electric vehicles, but then you need about 2.5 to 3 million batteries every year, EV batteries. Now, if that is the world we're looking at, these lead acid batteries are not good enough. They don't provide the kind of lifetime you'd want. But at the same time, for us to experiment in lithium technology, that's also crazy expensive because we're not manufacturing them in Bangladesh. This means we have to import everything, and you put in the cost of importing, then all the paperwork that needs to come in with that just makes it very, very difficult to kind of get into that experimentation space. So I think within the policy circle, there really needs to be a much bigger push in Bangladesh for R&D in battery technology to kind of see what options do we have beyond. But one thing in Bangladesh that's very important, I think it's been covered by many of the panelists already, is cost, right? Cost is going to be at the heart of this. Like whatever new battery technology is provided, or however we want to optimize battery technology, it needs to be affordable. And right now, it's lead acid is, the most affordable option that we have. Yeah, I think it's just a combination of that. But at the same time, there are no financial incentives either for people to even change the times at which you would, for example, charge your batteries. So if you look at the side of the garage owners, where they're handling the charging of the battery, these chargers are like are not that efficient chargers. So you end up paying or having to have a much higher electricity bill, irrespective of the fact that you're charging at night when you have the lowest tariff rate that's being offered. These are super off-peak tariff. But you have a crappy charger, you're not really going to get much wins out of it. And what that also means is that you're passing on that cost to rickshaw drivers. So when you're looking at the economics of a rental driver, not working out, but what would be an incentive for these garage owners to change the way that they charge, going into potentially solar rooftop charging? But there needs to be a financial mechanism or a incentive for them to do that. Right now, if you look at the summer months,
right?
Sorry?
System from the generation, financing to the vehicles, charging, everything, right? So we are getting close to the end of the hour. So I'm just gonna go across all the panelists. And I think Jim, Reina, you said you need to drop off fast, right? So Jim, maybe first you, just one wish that could help you fund the next Tesla from the South.
Yeah, I think it's, well, I'm biased to say this, but I think this is all about, it's a financing question. How do we get the right financing models in place to ensure that we can create the right payment models so everybody can adopt this technology? We know it works. We know people want it. We know people like it. It's just a matter of how do we pay for it?
Karthik? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm a hardware guy, but I have to agree with Jim. It's about finance. And all I can say from a hardware and perspective, we need to mass produce to get the cost down. That's the other piece of the puzzle. This will only work at economy of scale. And if we do just little pieces and droplets, we will not make it. But we need to think big. And that's my wish, that policies and entrepreneurs and finances think big, because then there's a huge opportunity ahead of us.
Yeah, from my side, I mean, agree. But I think my main point is like the sustainability element, right? We need to take this into account, that the vehicles, we are considering recycling, we're considering clean energy use, we're including the efficiency of both the vehicles and the batteries and the energy in general. And otherwise, we're just creating kind of a different problem than what we had before. So, yeah.
Karthik, so in India, there is a lot of support from the government, and there's a lot of good policy push here. So we're not wishing for that, but yes, a right financial engineering for financing of the asset is one of the core requirements. Technology is available, infrastructure is being built up with a lot of companies and startups. So I think the right financial engineering is required.
Let's talk.
You're the last word.
Yeah.
Do you have a wish?
Can't hear you.
You can barely.
No, I can. Sorry. So just you're the last one.
Okay. So closing remarks on my side. I mean, I wish I was in Varun's shoes where we have that kind of policy environment. But I think that's the stage we're at. I think we definitely need policy support for doing more research and development into these new technologies, having the market be open for us to start more experimentation to new technologies. And obviously, I think financing, I mean, what's already been said, I mean, it will play a big role, but in Bangladesh's case, what we need right now is a lot more R&D and an open market to trying out new technologies.
Thank you, everyone, for a really amazing session, and thanks to Sebastian for making this happen. Look forward to keeping in touch with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Yes.
Great. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for the panel.